Hey guys, so welcome to the Unity and Disagreement webinar. I'm glad you guys have found us. If you are someone that knows Restoration Covenant Church and that has been coming or been attending, welcome. It's good to have you here. If it's someone that is just stumbling upon this and has never interacted with Restoration, we are really glad you're here. Welcome. We are just excited to be talking about something that we all believe in, I think, even whether we're believers in Jesus Christ or not. We all believe in the importance of coming together and getting to know people that don't agree with us. So I'm just going to quick introduce myself, and then I'm going to let my good friend here, Jack, introduce himself as well. Yeah, my name is Daniel Morgenstern. I work for Restoration Covenant Church. I'm a not quite full-time minister, but like I'm involved in the work, and I'm also a guy that serves with the National Guard in Minnesota here. And then I've basically been a believer my entire life. I believe in Jesus Christ, who's like the risen Son of God and is the God who became man. And I also tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side, a little bit more in the zone of I tend to think that like the United States has been a blessing to the world, and really I'm just suspicious of change. Like I like things to a lot of times stay the same. And my main operandi, the thing that drives me when I'm trying to figure out a problem is I resolve on, I think about my like moral compass, my internal moral structure, and my faith, and that's what helps me solve problems. But I'm also a big nerd though, and I really enjoy just kind of some more fun things. Like I love my Star Wars, I love my history, my world history, and my tabletop games. And that's something that led me to meet this guy. So, but yeah, Jack, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Jack Poblocki, given name John, but my parents called me Jack, and here I am. I'm 25 years old. Currently, I'm living in Portland, Oregon, but I have been all over the country. Of the past few years, I've been in Philadelphia, Denver, Tampa, and of course, Minnesota, and then various other kind of smaller travels. I am a web developer by trade. Currently, I'm working on back-end systems for Nike. I'm technically contracting for them as opposed to directly employed. I was raised Catholic. Danny and I are both from Minnesota. We met each other when we were young. I was raised Catholic, but at a young age before I met Daniel, I became an atheist. So that's a foundation of our relationship. I consider myself to be sort of a standard liberal progressive. You know, I favored Bernie during the Democratic primaries. What else? I tend to view change as an integral part of life and something that is necessary with the systems of the world being what they are today. And to the best of my abilities, I attempt to make rational choices and choices that are best for myself and those around me, including my loved ones, but not limited to. Interests. Danny and I actually share a lot of interests, actually. We've played Dungeons and Dragons together quite a bit. We share an interest in history. Debating the various viewpoints of it has always been a really good talking point for us. We love strategy gaming, actually. That was a big thing that got us together in the first place, sort of playing the old creative assembly games together and forming new ideas about history and tactics. It's always been a great love of ours. And of course, we've always shared computer gaming. We did a lot of LAN parties when we were teenagers. A lot of great sleepovers.
Yeah. So that's really kind of how we got together and how we met. Is we met with this shared interest in looking at the world, oftentimes in kind of a critical and analytical way. But we really quick stumbled into the reality that we looked at it from very different lenses. But yes. That was literally 15 years ago. We met in middle school, and we've been friends ever since. And yeah, it was at Scott Highlands Middle School, and I specifically remember like I don't even know how we bumped into each other, but one of the memories.
Sixth grade home ec class.
Say again?
Sixth grade home ec class. I remember
Oh,
specifically.
oh, there you
We were
go.
just in a group together, so we're sitting at the same table, and then we'd be like, cutting things out or knitting together, and then sharing all of these crazy experiences we had playing Rome Total War.
Yeah, yeah. Which I mean, we were, yeah. Oh my gosh, we were complete nerds. We're
Yeah, we
still
were going.
still are complete nerds, to be honest. Yeah, one of my favorite memories is actually somehow I had managed to get through middle school. I think it was even early high school without having seen Lord of the Rings and being a huge nerd. And so we were on a trip up to Wisconsin Dells, and Jack busts out the extended edition Lord of the Rings, and has completely ruined me for it forevermore because now I can't watch it without feeling like there's stuff missing. Like I'm always like, wasn't there a scene in between that?
The extended editions are objectively the correct way to watch them, though.
Yeah. But any case, well, actually, I don't know. Is there anything that jumps out to you, Jack, before we move on to anything?
I remember playing Risk at your house. I remember when
Yeah.
you go there, it was right across from the middle school where we met. So I went back to your place like several times. We did this like sequentially day after day for like a week or something like that. I remember I did a really bad George W. Bush impression. I was talking about my strategy,
Oh my
strategic,
God.
if you recall. And your brother Andrew made that joke. Like Jack just got back from the John, and everybody was on the floor laughing.
This is good. This is good. Yeah, sounds at least a little bit like Andrew. So, but yeah, the as much as we shared in common, we had a lot. Obviously, you can hear from where we've ended up. Those differences didn't just manifest out of nowhere. We started really even when we had met, being very much opposed to one another, and because we believe so differently from one another, we'd have these long debates, like literally sitting around, like walking home from school or out on a trampoline. And really to this day, that's still the case. I know that if I'm going to call Jack up and ask him how he's doing, I better be prepared for, I better have at least an hour and a half set aside, because we're going to get on some subject and we're going to talk about the world, how life is, politics, whatever it is.
Oh, we gab like old birds. Yeah.
If you can't already tell.
Hour and a half is a minimum. Sometimes it's like 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah. But you need that time to get through the subjects. So, but the other thing that's kind of the really awesome thing about this is being two people that believe so differently from one another. We've gotten a chance to learn a lot from one another. So, so just like something that has really jumped out to me in preparation for this conversation and this unity and disagreement conversation was that like my view on atheism has completely shifted, and I see people that don't believe the same as me. I used to fall prey to this kind of idea that would say that, oh, well, atheists just want that. They want their own God just so that they can do whatever they want, right? It's a hedonistic thing. It's just, they just want to like party and have a good time and not have any consequences. And what I found out from talking to Jack, at least specifically for him, and I think for most atheists really, is that it has less to do with like wanting to just do whatever you want and more to do with the fact of a lack of trust. The thing is, there's so many things in the world that can let you down, and really for a lot of them, God is one of them. Like the church and the people that were closest to them and what they had hoped from God seemed to not fall through, or it didn't happen. It fell through, and so what they were left with trusting in is then worldly leaders, people around them, political leaders, but that falls through too. So soon all that's left to you to trust is yourself, because that's the only thing you know intimately well and is always with you and you can fully grasp and touch and see. And so it's not a desire to just go crazy and run around like, I'll do whatever I want. It's just a reality of I have to trust in something, and this is the only thing that's solid enough to trust in.
And like, needless to say, my views of Christianity have changed pretty dramatically. Not that I had a well-rounded idea of it when we met. So first of all, like when we were younger, we would do a lot more debates about just sort of very basic things like the existence of God, or very specific things in the Bible that were sort of already big talking points years and years before we ever met, years and years before we were ever born. So creationism, the age of the earth, evolution, stuff like that. One of the things, I mean, there are two kind of big takeaways that I changed our dialectic from my end, at least, between those early years and sort of what we've developed into now. The first is that trying to debate the existence of God as an idea is not really the correct approach. You know, for people who experience faith and who interact with that faith, God is not a conclusion that they drew. They didn't like view all of the evidence carefully under a microscope slide and then decide, well, yes, God is the only logical conclusion. For people who practice and experience faith, God is very often and very usually, I'd say, an active force in their lives. God is something that they interact with, something that, in a real sense, they can perceive and maybe not see and touch, but maybe see and touch in the same way that I can see and touch this comb. God is as real to a religious person as this comb is to me, and trying to convince people otherwise using logic is never going to work. You're not going to convince me that comb doesn't exist because I can see it. It's right there. So that really, kind of changed the dialectic. God is, not a conclusion. God is the evidence, right? The other thing that I realized fairly early on, I think, is that I really didn't want to change Danny's mind about God. I mean, I was raised Catholic and I became an atheist before I met Danny. That wasn't easy for me. It wasn't an easy transition. It's very scary. It's not something that I would want someone else to go through. It's something that I see missing a lot from sort of atheist narratives about Christians who lose their faith, is the suffering of it, the really negative consequences of it. It's not something that I want to inflict upon anyone else. I'm not an anti-theist.
Yeah, and on my part, I'm probably not quite as in the same place with Jack. I do, in fact, hope that he'll one day come into the fold. But what I have come to the conclusion is that I'm not going to argue him into that. Like, there's no way to talk him into that. He, just like he was talking about with the comb, he doesn't have that experience. He doesn't have that daily interaction with God, and until he has that, it's not going to happen. And so me trying to like force it down his throat is just a waste of time, and actually is counterproductive. I'm going to force him away as a friend if I, every time we meet, like just pitch him the Jesus question yet again. So we've kind of come to this place of agreement to disagree. We just have to be unified in the fact that we know that we are disagreeing. And so we kind of were talking about like, this skill is worth sharing. This is something that people need, is this ability to be comfortably sitting in a place where you disagree with one another and yet still care about one another and still want to be around one another. And so that's what we're kind of here to talk about. It's already quite a few minutes in, and I hope you've stuck around, but this is the good stuff here. So we're going to talk about, how did we do it? Like, how do we make this work? How do we get to the point where we are? And we're obviously not going to get everything in this time, but we'd love to give you some of the lessons that we've learned as friends, going through years and years of hard-fought conversations and hard-fought battles over various different things. So yeah, do you have anything you want to add to that before we move on, Jack?
Yeah, let's dive right into the meat of it.
Yeah. So I think there's really kind of two things that have to be talked about, or two major kind of categories that have to be talked about when finding unity and disagreement. And the first one is the thoughts you have. So when you are thinking about, when you are in the midst of a conversation, when you're thinking about the conversation ahead of time, what are some of the things that you just got to stick in your brain and have a mental practice of doing to be effective at disagreeing and yet still caring for someone? And so one that jumps to mind for me, and I'll hand it over to Jack right after this, is a commitment to assuming the best about the other person. I think this is the thing that you see the most in a lot of cases online, and even in like discussions around the dinner table, is that the moment that someone says something contrary to what I believe, people will oftentimes jump on that, and they'll assume that person is far worse than they actually are. So if, for instance, someone brings up free healthcare, the assumption might be, well, they're just looking to socialize the whole system. Everything will be socialized. And that's not necessarily what the person is saying. All they're saying is free healthcare specifically. And if I assume that their intentions are in fact to better my country, it becomes a really good conversation, because rather than it being like an attack on my belief system, it's someone trying to show me a deficiency that I have and trying to build me up and make me better. And kind of a practice for this, or the way that this actually happens, is that when you're in a conversation and someone says something, rather than jumping to like all the ways that you're going to counter it, actually listen to what they're saying, and hear the full statement, and hear their voice, their tone, and look at their face. See what emotions are behind those words, because I think oftentimes you'll see someone that really does want to help, really does want to better you.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true, especially with as crazy as politics are now. Yeah, it's a complicated world, and in order to make it simpler, to make it possible to deal with it, we kind of have this idea of types of people, right? You know, you're that type of person. This is the set of beliefs that you have, and these are the characteristics that I know to associate with that type of person. And of course, we totemize. We think of people that we disagree with as inherently meaning the worst for us, and we try to twist their beliefs in order to justify that, because it feels good. It feels good when other people are actually just genuinely bad people out to get you. And that, like, obviously that's a huge obstacle to trying to get along and really get to know someone who's different from you. And on top of that, I mean, even if you don't have any negative associations for the type of person, the type of person you're talking to, maybe, they say that they want free healthcare, and you don't have anything against socialists or democratic socialists or whatever. Oftentimes we tend to use types of people to sort of bundle their belief systems together. You can see this in live action, especially in politics. I'll talk to my dad and hear him bring Hillary Clinton into conversations where Hillary Clinton does not belong. He encounters the other, and then, somewhere in his head, he puts it together. Oh, I'm speaking to a Democrat. It's time to attack Hillary Clinton. Oftentimes you'll find that people don't like Hillary Clinton, or that someone has one belief you disagree with, but then 5 beliefs that you do agree with. People are complicated, right? Understanding that people are complicated and figuring out what someone believes entirely so that you know exactly what you disagree about can avoid a lot of conflicts.
Yep. And in practice, the way this plays out for us is that whenever we're talking about a conversation, we assume that the other person at their core isn't in fact a good person and wants the best for other people. We assume that, like, when Jack says something about, something about maybe like how the police should act, right? I'm assuming that he actually does in fact want the best for our country, and he does actually want the best for those police officers too. He doesn't hate them. He just wants them to be maybe held more in check. And so by assuming those things, and sometimes the best way to show someone that you are in fact not assuming the worst about them, you're assuming the best, is to say, I know you stand for this and this and this. And I know as that, I'm a little confused. How can you believe this? Because what that shows the person is that what that actively does for the person is it says, I know you're a good person. I'm not threatened by you. But I really do want to know, why do you disagree with me?
I lost your audio feed there for a second, so I hope that...
Yeah, I was just talking about essentially the practice of listing off what you know about the person, the good things you know about the person, and then from a place of that, asking the question, as opposed to just trying to trip them up.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like this entire practice wouldn't be so complicated if it didn't just feel so good to get that one big point across, right? Let's be real. Many of us believe in some things so strongly that we think about sometimes, what would happen if I met someone who disagreed with me, and how would I be able to carefully and cleverly talk them down or something like that. And then, of course, the time actually comes, and that big, clever comeback you were waiting for never arrives until 5 minutes after the conversation, and we, look like fools. But don't give in too much to the temptation of, it feels good to slam this point on the table and say, ha, that was my trap card, you're wrong. That's not what the nature of the debate needs to be. If you're going to both learn and grow as people and get the most out of it, there are long-term goals that you need to cultivate, and that I think are far more rewarding than just having an argument with a random stranger who's never going to want to talk to you again.
Yeah. And I think that leads really good into another point, is that you need to come into the conversation being willing to be wrong and being willing to learn. Essentially, if you come in assuming that you're right, the conversation doesn't have any value at that point. Like, if you assume that there is no way you are wrong, then why are you even talking to someone? It's not going to help you talking to them. You might as well just write a paper and put it up, and if people like your words, they'll like them. But you have to come in with this readiness to learn from the other person, because otherwise these conversations are just two people that are completely assured in themselves smashing into each other and not gaining anything from that clash.
Yeah, being wrong, or the capacity for being wrong, is an art form, and if anyone says that they've mastered it, then they're probably trying to sell you something. It's tough. It's tough, but generally, just kind of, I think especially with Danny, after a while, I got used to it. There was exposure therapy, right? Danny's smart. He has a lot of really good points. I've had a lot of entrenched beliefs that Danny has made me second guess and question. That's normal, healthy, and natural. I'm not a bad person for having been wrong.
Yep. And I had to reconcile with some of the assumptions, jumping back to what we had said earlier, some of the assumptions I'd had about non-believers, and realizing how wrong I was in some of the things I had, even just having met Jack, assumed of him. I barely knew him, and yet I had assumed these things about him that just weren't true. So I had to be okay with being wrong. If I had let that wrongness get the best of me, if I had let that glaring hole in my argument, or that glaring hole in my thought process, destroy me and basically become a thing that I just don't even want to see you because it's a painful reminder of how I was wrong, then I would lose out on a great friend who I've had for 15 years now. And this is something that we always end up happening. I would say, as an aside, when we're talking about some of the good things that we've gotten knowledge-wise, we always end up dipping into the sentimental. It's hard not to go, oh, you got me. But
like old birds.
Yeah. But anyway, it's just, as I was saying, it's just the ability to be wrong, and to be confident in being wrong, to say, yep, I got wrong, and I'm willing to learn something, is invaluable to talking to someone that you disagree with, because otherwise you're going to be insecure and you're going to lash out.
Yeah, I agree. I remember you mentioned the assumptions that you had about non-believers earlier, and we've kind of already talked through that, but it's very interesting. I find that there's sort of a base assumption that's very easy to fall into, that the reason that other people, especially very different people, are the way that they are is because it's easy, or because they're getting something very cynically and very selfishly out of it. I find that those arguments very oftentimes fall through, right? A common assumption about atheists is that they are the way that they are, again, because they want to erect themselves as God, or because they just don't want to have to follow all of the rules of Christianity or something like that. And, I think there are atheists who have similar views about Christians. The reason they are the way that they are is because the fast, easy, gratifying promise of an afterlife is much more satisfying to them than the harder existential questions of the concept that maybe when you die, nothing happens. I think that's false on both sides. I have a better understanding of Christianity now than I think a lot of atheists do. I know, Danny, that your faith asks a lot of you sometimes. It's not easy to be a Christian. A lot of times it really wasn't easy for me not to be, right? Existentially, it can be very scary. And it was very hard for me to, grow up in a household full of Christians and not be one.
Yeah. I mean, just to maybe help some of the people of faith there watching, I want to give you kind of a word picture to help describe what he's talking about when he's saying it's not easy sometimes to not have faith. Realize that that to have faith is this assurance that there is there's a God of the universe out there that cares for me, and that there is a reason for things happening in my world, and that there's a cosmic order, and that the ending, good wins at the end of this story, right? And Jack doesn't have that. He doesn't have that cosmic story going on in his life. He might have some idea about like human nature that might be encouraging, but at the end of the day, he does know that like he himself is flawed. He knows about his weaknesses, and he knows that that's the thing that he has to trust in, and he knows it's flawed, and that can be scary. Like, will I mess up my life? That's a tough question for Christians. Imagine someone that doesn't have the safety net of a God that cares for us. It's not a, like, there is no like easy answers in how to do life. That no one's out there just walking around through life without some degree of struggle. Well, to live is to deal with, as a Christian, I believe it's to deal in sin, is to wade through the difficulties that come from the fall. And if you're a non-Christian, you just know that life can be painful. It's random and tough, and it's what we're dealt. It's the hand we're dealt. So no one out there is nobody out there that is walking around with like a cynical, easy way of twirling their mustache, going like, "Ha, I found the perfect way. I found the perfect way to live my life with no regrets. Ah, yes, and it's super easy. All you have to do is believe this, right?" That's not how it works.
Honestly, I don't think anyone who has spent a lot of time, like as much time as we have, thinking and talking about the afterlife, has taken the easy way out.
It's true. I did want to also jump on one thing here, and we kind of demonstrated it just right now. But it's the another thing you have to do, and this is actually one of those actions and one of those practices, not one of the thoughts. A practice that you have to take up if you want to have and maintain friends with people that you disagree with. Friendships, I should say, with people you disagree with, is you have to be ready to defend that person to people that you agree with. Mm-hmm. So a good example of this is kind of what I just did right now, is talking about, no, actually atheists aren't that way. This is what I know of atheists. I know an atheist, and this is how he is, right? And I just modeled that for you. But actually, Jack had a really awesome experience that I'm going to totally crowbar him into telling right now with from his college days.
Oh yeah, actually, I was socializing with a group of students and a professor, actually, and we're all sitting around a table. I can't remember the exact situation, but it was in college, and they were basically all just sort of bad-mouthing and bashing creationists, like not Christians in general, but very specifically creationists. And I found myself defending Danny, like kind of stepping up and saying like, well, that's not how they think at all. That's, I don't understand what you're talking about. I know a creationist, and he's this way, and he's like that. And then the professor turns to me and she says, I just don't understand how you could be friends with someone like that. And that stuck with me.
Yeah, and I think that's been a spark for a lot of our conversations. Is there's this real pressure on you when you believe something to just kind of demonize and not think about the other side as people worth being with, worth being around. Like they are just a waste of your time, or maybe even dangerous to be around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's not a distinction that knows a particular political category. As you can see, I mean, you've seen that kind of behavior in your spheres. That was at a liberal arts college where I saw that, this base tribalism is infiltrating every layer of our lives nowadays.
Yeah. And though I can't say this about non-believers, but what I can say this to believers is that we are commanded to be reaching out to people that don't agree with us. We're commanded by the Great Commission to go out to the world and to proselytize the world. And what that means is having those people in our life. So if we as Christians become insular and we hide from people that we don't agree with, we're actually in defiance of Christ's orders, of our King's orders. And that is unacceptable. And not just, it would already be unacceptable if it was in defiance just of his orders, but it also just goes fundamentally against all the things that were done for us. When we were strangers, Christ reaches out to us, right? And so if I'm not willing to reach out to a guy who I disagree with on, I don't know, something as piddling as maybe like healthcare. Like that's important, but it's in the grand scheme, maybe it's not that important. And if I can't like reach out to him because of that, what right do I have to call myself a friend of God? Sorry, that kind of isn't something you can as easily respond on. Let's move on to the next
Not something I can bounce off of so organically.
I'm very sorry. Went into I will a few times at least go into full on minister mode.
It's not something that I believe, but I have an appreciation for Christian sermon and for Christian belief systems, especially where those systems, I think, countermand the worst aspects of our own culture and society. And yeah, this idea of outreach, the idea of treating other people inherently as your neighbors, as people who you can live with, I think that's really powerful in our society, and a really powerful given our society. There we go. The Christian sense of community has always been something that I think is missing in today's world.
Yeah, and again, the part, just to balance things out here, the thing I've really appreciated from atheist communities is the very staunch and very unflinching resolve to look at things the way they are and to not like look to the left or to the right, to say if it's uncomfortable, I'll still look at it. And that's not always the case, right? The same way the community isn't always the case with Christianity. But like oftentimes I find that atheists are much more willing to accept some inconsistencies within themselves than Christians are, and inconsistencies within their belief structures than Christians are. They're constantly willing to better their understanding of what they believe. And we as Christians oftentimes get kind of stuck in this rut where we just say, I believe this, and we don't examine it. We don't go, well, why do I believe it? We just say, I believe it because I believe it. And in some ways, faith is like that, but it doesn't always have to be. There are some things that are worth looking at. So let's jump on to the next point. And I think we've actually touched on a lot. We've already covered a lot of ground. But I wanted to talk about one more thing in the thoughts category before we moved on to practices full on. And that is that first and foremost, before you can do anything to reach out, and maybe we should have started here, but before you do anything to start reaching out to someone that you disagree with, you have to be confident in your own identity and in your own beliefs. So what does that look like? Actually, we're
not like necessarily the best example of that, because I know about you. For me, I was definitely like, as a kid, I remember being a lot more insecure in my beliefs, and I was definitely much more threatened when my beliefs were challenged. And our conversations definitely helped to disarm some of those immediate reactions. Everyone's worked their way into a situation where they're just they've decided against all reason that this is the hill they're going to die on. They're defending a point for no reason other than ego, and I've definitely been there with you.
Yeah, and that raises another point that we'll definitely talk about in a second here. But yeah, we had to muddle through this to get to the place that we are. But when we come into a conversation now, we both know like where we stand, and we're confident in that stance, and we know that this conversation might shift us slightly in that stance, but it's not going to necessarily just change it overnight. And actually, the best thing about it is that we know that just because the other person is intelligent and we care about them and they believe something differently doesn't mean that that's a threat to us, right? I know you're a smart guy, and I care about your opinion, and even though I know that your opinion of certain things in my life is contrary to what I believe about them, that doesn't, that's not threatening, because I know who I am. And I know that just because you believe this doesn't mean that I am in danger or that there is something wrong with me. It just means that, we have different views, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely agreed.
Yeah, it takes some practice. It takes practice to come into a thing and be willing to take the thing you believe in and put it in front of someone and say, hey, can you look at this for me and tell me what you think?
And it's just, it's oftentimes like taking something that you identify with. It's almost like ripping off your own face and putting it on the table and saying, okay, tell me everything that's wrong with it.
But until you're willing to do that, you're not going to find the blemishes. It's just the reality.
Yeah, yeah. And in this case, once the blemishes have been pointed out to you, it is a lot easier to fix them.
Yep. And it's a constant process, right? Like over the years, we've slowly come to middle, but it took years. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen with one conversation. But I want to like divert here for just one moment because I feel like I'm hearing someone in the comments, or I'm hearing someone saying, "Well, why is this worth it? It's just like this seems like so much work. I have to do all these things. I have to distance myself. I have to like choose to not look at people badly. Why would I do this?" And I'm sure Jack has a few thoughts on this, but I'm gonna say first off, it's so worth it. It's so worth it, and the reason why is that it just opens up your horizons, right? Like before meeting Jack and becoming as close of friends with him as I did, it I had this view that this is the barriers of who I can be friends with. Like these are the barriers of who I have on the table to be close friends. And Jack, by showcasing that I could not only enjoy time with someone that disagreed with me heavily, but like find like peace and support and comfort in someone that disagrees with me, opens up my horizons. I can confidently go into a new situation and say I'll probably be able to find at least somebody that I can connect with because I don't have to be looking for just Christians. I can be looking for anyone that fits a certain bill of just personality traits.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that I think that this is a problem that's also sort of systemic and endemic in our society and getting worse, right? We meet people in spheres where we get to control who we do or don't interact with in the first place. We meet people on the internet and social media now in places where, you basically go there knowing that you're never going to encounter someone that you actually disagree with. You don't meet nearly as many people, just kind of out and about at the local store, at the local bar, at whatever, the places where people used to congregate, right? You don't meet people randomly just because happenstantially you're in the same trade or you live in the same neighborhood nearly as much anymore. People are just vastly more isolated. And I think that's a huge part of what's tearing our society apart. You look out there and you see so many Americans who hate each other a lot more than they hate any foreign threat and a lot more than they hate a deadly virus. And that is, I think demonstrably the case. And it's sad. It's
I mean,
killing us.
yeah, I mean, if this last election didn't convince you that only being friends with people that agree with you is a bad thing, I don't know what will. Like, we had two different iterations in very different places all across the nation of political violence breakout. And whether you sympathize with one side or the other, like in some degrees, that's kind of scary. Like, even if it's for a good cause, to have something to have violence break out isn't great. So
Yeah.
and that comes from, again, that echo chamber. And I'm sure you've heard about this, but if you haven't, just hearing about all the echo chambers that we have, whether it's in the internet or whether it's on the news or even sometimes in just our small communities. Essentially, what it looks like is that you find places that only confirm what you believe. And actually, like places like social media, like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, are built on these concepts. They're built on showing you more of the thing you already liked. So you're just that much more likely to keep finding more and more extreme things along the vein of what you believe. Like, again, because I've known Jack, I'm much more moderate. And at this point, it gets like kind of disgusting to see some of the things that Facebook will try and push in my face because I just know it's not true. And yet it's trying to convince me that, hey, look, this is what liberals are like. And I'm like, that's not true. I know a liberal, and he's not like that at all. But if I didn't know Jack, how much more easily would it be for me to get led down a complete fantasy land where a whole half of the country is my enemy and is out to destroy my nation, which is, again, just insanity. They live here. Why would they want this? I'm not going to get off on that, but still, go ahead.
And the impact of this is just so visible in our communities and out in our streets. I mean, I live in Beaverton, which is a suburb of Portland. And I think, I mean, everyone's heard about what's going or what has been going on in Portland over the past year. I mean, basically just nonstop protests and, you know, Proud Boys and Antifa clashing in the streets. The scale of that was probably not quite as big as the news would have you believe, but it was still happening. And I actually participated. I marched with BLM back in Philadelphia when I lived there before the protests became violent and chaotic. But like on the first day of protests, I was out there marching, and there were people who came to that presentation, call them what you will, you know, agents provocateur. There were people who came to test with thermite charges basically stuffed down their hoodies, right? And the moment everything got bad, they started busting open police car windows and, you know, setting them on fire. You know, the evidence of the divide that's been growing in our country is all around us. And the cure, I think, is what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So if you're asking, why is it like, why do I have to put all this work in? Why is it worth it? Well, it's worth it because you're going to have an opening of your horizons, and you're going to have people in front of you that you never thought you could be friends with. They're going to be your best friends. But also, this is something that our society desperately, desperately needs. And if we don't get this right, we're going to tear ourselves apart. And I'm going to tell you, like, one more thing that just really it hits for me is that the experiences I've had where I've been able to come to consensus, like Jack was talking earlier about how, you know, it can feel good, right, to get one over on someone and to like get like, oh, you didn't think about this, I got you, right? But let me tell you, as good as that feels, like coming to a consensus, getting someone that disagreed with you to trust you and to like find a common ground, it takes a lot more work. But holy crap, like it feels 10 times better. Like to know that there was someone out there that you like disagreed with, or that like was completely didn't see your point of view at all. And then because you were respectful, because you assumed the best about them, because you like went through the steps of actually trying to understand them and being willing to be wrong, they came a little bit this way and you came a little bit this way, and you found something together. Like that's the kind of thing that I mean, that's what families are made of, right? That's what friends and family and communities are made of, is where we all come together. And that feels 10 times better because it's built on the positive parts of us. It's built on love rather than hate and aggression.
If I might preemptively jump ahead, this is definitely something that I think a lot of us have experienced with our own families, and some of us maybe, especially sort of as this last election cycle has passed and people on both sides are becoming more radical. A lot of people are questioning, you know, what do I do about this member of my family who believes this thing that I don't agree with? I think that's a great place for people to start if they want to try something like this out.
Yeah, I mean, again, talking about how good it would feel to, you know, even get some stranger to agree with you. Imagine getting like someone like a sibling or a parent or a child to like come around to your point of view. How much better that would feel to reconcile over things that you just pound your heads together over and over again. How much better would it be to find, you know, to find that in between, to find that place where you agree on. And I think that's going to be the next place we jump into on the, like how we do this is in that kind of, it's already was buried in the assuming the best about people, but it's that you want to come to a consensus at the end of your conversation. What do you agree on? So when you're having a conversation and when me and Jack are arguing through something, no matter how long it's been, no matter what we've talked about, no matter where we went with the conversation, we almost always try and end with, okay, so what have we decided? Like, where are we? And what we oftentimes find is that there's a lot more that we agree on than we disagree with in that particular conversation. Through all the twists and bends, let's say we were talking about, I don't know, like immigration, right? Through all the twists and bends, we both agreed that it is a good thing for people to be treated well, and it's also a good thing for the laws to be fair. And we just disagreed on methodology. And so if we come to that place where we can agree on certain things, and at the end of the conversation affirm what we agree on, it'll be that much easier to remember that the person is a good person and assume the best about them.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember in every debate, it's a really good idea to only disagree about one thing at a time, or focus on the things that you disagree about and establish all of the adjacent things that you agree about so you don't waste time on those points. It's easy to straw man someone or think, oh, this type of person believes this, and then suddenly you're trying to argue against a point that your opponent already or your friend already agrees on, right? And then, especially when you're talking about someone or we're talking to someone that has a really different belief system from you, different religion and different politics, et cetera, just set the stage of what you're disagreeing about very, very clearly. And, we can clearly, our different worldviews both influence what we think about gun control, right? Our ideology around gun control doesn't exist in a vacuum. We have different political ideologies and different religions and different world experiences that all inform our viewpoint on gun control. But it's a really bad idea in the middle of a debate about gun control to suddenly be arguing about all of these other things that we disagree with.
And that's how, you end up hurting someone, is if you say, oh, you just believe that because of this, right? That's what you're essentially saying there, is that the person, their ideas can't speak for themselves, and that the only reason they hold those ideas is because of some brainwashing that they had in some other area, right? You need to assume that their ideas are intelligent and that you just have to figure them out. If you do some sort of secondary side swipe or side attack, kind of like what Jack was talking about earlier with well, what about Hillary, right? That just distracts. It doesn't get either of you closer to understanding the issue at hand. And B, actually, even if you do win with that method, you actually haven't really convinced the person, and you haven't made the world better. What you've done is you've taken the worst part of their argument and you've brought that to center stage. And basically, if you're fighting against, when boxers box, they don't pull out the weakest, easiest guy that they could find on the street and go, okay, throw him in the ring. We're going to test my mettle. We're going to test my strength against this guy. No, that would be a bad test. What you want to find is you want to find some other boxer that is equally as strong to you and test against him, because that's how you're going to figure out how good you really are. If you're patting yourself on the back I got him. He couldn't answer the Hillary question, right? That's not helpful. It's just battling against a weaker side of that person's argument. It's petty, and it's not about learning or coming to a middle ground. It's just about winning.
I'm tempted to call that the Ben Shapiro paradigm, where he, has been doing this for a very long time and is a fully educated person. And then he goes to liberal arts college campuses to argue with freshmen because it makes him look good.
Yeah. And I want to say something real quick. If you're a huge fan of Hillary or a huge fan of Shapiro, these are our opinions, right? You like we're talking about here, it's all about being okay with disagreeing with people. So if you can see our intentions here, this is a good practice round for you. See our intentions here, right? We're not out to get them or crucify them. We just disagree with some of the ways that they do things.
Yeah, sorry. That was a bit of a snarky stab for the topic of this conversation.
Well, I realized I also threw out Hillary. And I was like, oh, what if somebody really likes Hillary? That might shut him down. So, but this is how these things work. We have to be okay with being wrong. Neither me or Jack feel particularly weird about just having done something that was wrong and then correcting it within the same conversation. That's what we did right here. And we're going to continue on talking about how to find unity and disagreement and not let that bug us. We're human. We learn. We move on.
We make mistakes. I definitely did want to point out in terms of practices. I actually had a pretty good one. Recognize defensive behavior when you see it, right? I mean, this is we've been in this place before ourselves, but especially I feel like this is a skill that I learned talking with you and carried outward into my life into other places. Obviously, like ideally speaking, everyone's a perfect monk, and we're all completely introspective when we recognize when we've become defensive and furtive, and we'll immediately take steps to countermand it. But realistically speaking, we're all just people with emotions, and sometimes it does get the better of us. Sometimes we feel hurt by a statement, or we feel threatened by a statement, and we throw out some kind of defense, or we go on the attack, or we do something that really just doesn't make sense in the context of the debate. As the observer and as the listener, kind of like recognize when the other person has become emotionally engaged in an unhealthy way. Like if they're going to be very aggressive or very defensive, recognize that and learn when to back off, right? If you're threatening someone's core beliefs, by the time they've entered into that defensive state, you're not going to convince them of anything, and you're not going to have any kind of productive conversation. Sometimes the healthiest thing to do is to just say, well, we're not going to do anything productive here, so let's just end this conversation here and talk about something else, right? Yep. Sometimes you can save it. Sometimes you can refocus and be like, okay, I'm sorry that I said that had the wrong implication. Let's focus back again what we were talking about before. And sometimes you just kind of have to both go for a walk and, wait until your head's in a better place. But getting good at like recognizing when things are getting hairy and when you need to pull out of that situation is definitely a big one.
Yeah. And there's also a kind of a flip side to this. If you can recognize that within yourself, that's also good. Like if you can find out, or like as you're talking to someone, realize, oh man, that stung, either after the fact or during the fact, that's really good, because what that will show you is places that maybe you're being inconsistent, and maybe like you're defending them not out of a sense of true belief, but just out of a sense of protectiveness, or out of a weakness of some of your like emotional background, right? Like if Jack calls out my beliefs on, I don't know, like something with the Second Amendment, and I suddenly start getting really, really aggressive and really defensive, like I feel it rising in myself. A really good thing that I can do is ask the question, why is this getting me so out of sync? Like what's happening here? And oftentimes in that moment, you're going to find things that you don't really believe about the subject at hand, right? You don't actually really care about gun control in this particular aspect. What you care about is this other thing. And when you've been all these years, you've been talking about gun control, you've really been talking about this over here. And that's, again, where that growth can really happen, and where having someone that pushes on you is really, really good and can help you grow, is just finding those places where you're sensitive, not because of what you believe, but because of what you feel. And I want to be clear here, just because you feel poorly about something, or just because you have an emotional reaction to something, doesn't mean you're a bad person or weak or something like that. We all feel things. It's just, I think all of us want to believe things, not based off just what our gut says, but also what our mind says, our whole being says. We don't want to believe things just because that's the easy way to believe it. We all want to be better. And the way we're better is by being honest with ourselves and being self-critical at times.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree.
Yep. Well, I think we're getting kind of low on time, but I do want to hit one last thing, and you kind of already touched on it, is that when things are getting hairy, you got to back off, but he also said it already in there, is, sorry, man, I didn't mean to say it that way. When things get out of hand, when things get bad, when there's been a continual like stress put on, you have to apologize. You have to make it right. And again, coming from the place of faith, forgiveness is hugely important to us as people of faith. Like, it is what Christ gave to us, and we are obligated to give it to others. And it's not just a thing of like, oh, you have to do it. It's the only way to maintain relationships. It's the only way to be truly happy with people, is to admit when you're wrong and apologize. Say, I'm sorry for that, and can we move on? Like, can we go on to other things?
Yeah, there's no such thing as like an emotional tough guy, right? People are complicated and fragile things, and that's not bad, right? We're all that way. We're all flawed. We're all fragile, and especially when we're exploring each other's beliefs like this, especially when we're talking about things that are so important to us and how we identify, it's just so easy to hurt someone and to do something wrong. And when you make that mistake, when you do something wrong, when you hurt someone, that is on you, right? Someone made themselves emotionally available to you. They opened up, and then you said something that was insensitive, and you took advantage of that, and you hurt them. And that's a Christian virtue. I'm sure you'd agree, Danny. But it's just being a good person is recognizing that you made the mistake, and you need to find a way to make it right. And generally, as you get to know each other better, it becomes a lot easier to do that.
And even if you didn't mean to hurt someone, just own it. It's going to be easier. It's going to be way easier for you to say, "Hey, I didn't mean it that way, but I'm sorry that's what happened." Right? Own the part that you can. And the thing is, when you own something, it's going to be 10 times easier for them to own things as well. If you're vulnerable, people will be vulnerable with you. And I think in a lot of ways, actually, that's kind of a really good way to kind of cap it off. All of this, we've been kind of talking in a lot of different ways, but really what it boils down to is just be kind of vulnerable with each other. Be willing to trust others carefully. Like, we don't want to hand over the keys to the kingdom to just anybody, but be willing to trust people and just watch. They will live up to that trust a lot of times.
And also just understand that there will be times when they just don't. Sometimes people they're not really looking to learn who you are. They're not really looking to, have what Danny and I have together. Some people will just criticize in bad faith, and you can't do anything about that. But, like what Danny and I have as friends is, I think it's been really important to me, just developing myself as a character, my personality, and my belief systems. It's completely worth it.
Yep. Yeah. Even if, again, for nothing more than just, I got a friend that, I love to play video games with, and I love to talk Star Wars with, but it's not just that, obviously. But even if it was just that, it would still be worth it. But I got all these other things. I got to grow as a person. I got to be better at my job, really. Like, I can be a better pastor because I knew Jack, and because he pushed me to learn about my beliefs, to figure out what I believed much better, and to put it into words, be able to explain it to someone.
That's touching.
So I guess we do want to end off with kind of a push, a little bit of a challenge to you guys. What I'm kind of going to push you guys on is that if you have a place of tension in your life, if you have someone that you care about, but man, it's just every single time we talk about this, it ends up just devolving into a fight, right? I would challenge you. See if you can't open up that conversation, but use some of these tools. Assume the best about them. Be willing to be wrong. Actually listen to them when they're talking. Be ready to apologize and state what you know about the person. Take some of these tools in and see if that conversation ends better. And heck, use us as an excuse, right? Say that, hey, I just watched a thing about how to agree in disagreement. I watched a thing about how to be unified in disagreement. I want to try it out. Is that okay? Can we talk about this thing? And I bet you, especially if it's someone that you care about and that they care about you, they're going to be open to trying something new, to trying to reconcile.
If what Danny has told me is true, I understand there's a pretty wide diversity of beliefs within the church itself. You guys all believe the same thing. You come to church because you're a community and you're unified by your faith. You always have that to fall back on. In a conversation, if things get out of hand, if someone gets hurt, if things get touchy, you always know that you're a community and that you mean what's best for one another, and that you have these things that unify them. So by all means, take advantage of that excellent, Christian sense of community that doesn't quite exist in the secular world, and use that to get to know someone in your life better.
Yep. So I hope you guys got something out of this. I know that we just we can easily ramble on, but we've grown a lot from this, and we know that you can too. So we hope that you'll take some of these to heart, some of these lessons to heart, not just for your sakes, but also somewhat for ours. It's somewhat selfish. We want all of us to live in a better world, and this is going to make it better, like 100%. Whether you're a believer in Christ or you believe in other things, whether that's other gods or other practices, I think we can all agree that a world where people listen to one another is a better world to be in. So thanks for signing in with us. Thanks for joining us. If you want to hear more of the Christian perspective, we have actually a talk on this on our Facebook, on our website. You found this. I'm assuming you can find that one as well. It's on the 28th. And it just dives more into what Christ says about unity and what, as a Christian, or even as someone that's just curious about what Christians are about, what is that all about when it comes to unity and about figuring out what to do when we disagree with one another? So I highly invite you to go try that out, see if that fits your fancy. If not, we'd still love to hear from you. What did you get out of this conversation? What are places where you've had difficulties in agreeing or being unified, or where are places that you've had great success? We can all learn from one another, and we'd love to hear from you. So do you have anything you want to close out with, Jack?
Well, I can't match that strong closer. If anybody learns anything, if anybody, makes a relationship, makes a connection that they wouldn't otherwise have had, then I'll have been confident that this was absolutely worth it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks, guys, and we hope to hear from you. So, bye.